Krakoans and the Krakoa Curious. Welcome to a brand new show here on the Weird Science Network. Some of you asked for it, and now you all have it, an X-Men show. The podcast you are listening to right now is episode 1 of The Weird Dose of X. By the way, I'm Jason C., the same guy you've heard doing the Marvel Spotlight and Weekly Marvel Show these past few months with Jim, and I am here with your other host, direct from Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill, longtime friend of the Weird Science Network, Chris Sheehan.
Hey, everybody. The place has changed a bit since the last time I was here. A bit of a facelift on the old format. It's pretty crazy to be here. It's also a thrill to be here. Some folks who are listening, maybe 2 or 3 of you, might remember me. As Jason said, I am the Chris half of Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill. That was a show that was born on the Weird Science DC Comics podcast back in 2016. We were on something like 150 episodes, and it's very, very cool to be back. And to do an X-Men show with Jason, that is also going to be a lot of fun here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. I know
it's been a busy time over in the X-Men area these past few years and months.
Little bit, yeah. And I know on the main show, the X-Men books kind of went a little too far out. So we're here to make, or I was going to say we're here to make sense of it, but
to the best of our little abilities. Yep. So the very first goal of this podcast, and who knows where we end up eventually, we're just trying this out and seeing what works. But our first goal is to get all you listeners ready for the big Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals Axe Summer event. So even if you haven't been reading the X-Men, or for that matter, the Eternals, you'll be ready after hearing this couple of podcasts to go right into that and have some idea what the heck is going on.
Wait a minute. You're telling me there's an Eternal series?
Who
would have greenlit that?
And even more surprisingly, it's actually really good.
It's good. Yeah. Shocking.
I was stunned. But that's a whole other show. We'll get there. Yeah, today we're talking about we have only about 350 episodes or issues of the X-Men to cover. So we'll get to that first, and then we'll get to the Eternals.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, has anything been happening over with the X-Men?
Oh, there's like these like old balls. There's this lady, a very bit player from back in the day, Maura Mctaggart's been making waves.
I've heard of her, sure.
Yeah,
right.
There was like this storyline called the Phalanx Covenant back in the 90s. They're doing something with the Phalanx again. Not a whole heck of a lot.
So Chris, it sounds to me like you've read a couple X-Men comics in your day, that you've been doing this for a while. So tell us about your X history.
Certainly. I have been reading the X-Men for ever, over 30 years at this point. And for those who don't know, I have a show called X-Lapsed, which was all about my grand return to following the X-Men books after I was chased off of them back during the Blue and Gold era, which not my favorite time. Not my favorite time. But I was gone from the X-Men books for a very, very slight amount of time, 2017 to 2019, so 2 years. But it feels like I missed 30 years. So much stuff happened within those years. So X-Lapsed was my way of rediscovering, getting back into it. And I started with Hoxpox here. But my fandom goes back all the way to, Jim Lee, Chris Claremont. It's a pretty common story for folks of my vintage, I'd imagine, coming in with the volume 2, number 1 and everything like that. But I've been doing this a very long time. But wow. I know you are more...
A little more different. I'm kind of more new to the world. I have not, like some people, been reading comics most of my life.
Sure.
I really started, when I was a real little kid, I used to get comics down at the Mainway on Valley Road there in Clifton, New Jersey. And I would pay my 50 cents, and then it went up to 60 cents and made me mad. But I'd get my Richie Rich comics. I'd get my Casper the Friendly Ghost, and, those kind of things. Little silly kids comics. And I had a couple of like Superman digests that I would pick up here and there, but I was never really like an 80s, 90s comics kind of guy. Until 2015, 2016, you would hear people talking about these comic things, sounded like fun. My library offered some online, you could borrow some digital comics, so I checked that out. Okay. And I started getting into it and wanted to find out, some of the connections I knew were going over my head. So I Googled up some reviews online, ended up on the Weird Science review website and learned some stuff there. saw a link to the podcast. I tried that out and thought maybe my podcast feed was acting up because it said the podcast was like 9 hours long. And
that was a short one.
That's really how it was back in the day.
That was a short one, though.
Yeah, it was. So I was. That's what got me baptized into the Get Fresh crew there, and so I've been listening for several years, and then jumped on doing some of these podcasts with Jim a couple months ago now, and here I am now doing it podcast with one of my other podcast heroes, Chris. So I'm really excited to be doing this.
So you said you came into comics later, of course. When you first encountered the X-Men, and not talking about like animated series or movies, right. When you first encountered them, actually, they were all 4-color glory, or I guess they were 2-color when you started, but because you were started around the blue and gold, I'm sure. But what was your initial reaction? How did you receive?
So I knew who the X-Men were, of course, just by existing in the world. I've run into Wolverine. I've run into Cyclops. I knew the bald guy who looked like Captain Picard. But, that's all I kind of knew. So I was reading, all the comics, dipping into everything. And it was right the blue and gold era. And I started reading it. And it just never grabbed me. I didn't really understand who the characters really were or why I should care about what they were doing or what, if anything, they had to do with the rest of the Marvel universe. I said, okay, that's off on the side. I've heard about this great Claremont run in the past. Maybe I'll read that someday. But for now, I'm going to stick with, my regular Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, the other names I knew better. So I did not get back into the X-Men stuff until I heard there was this great big reboot from this guy named Jonathan Hickman, who I'd never read anything by before. And I heard it was going to be, all new, all different. This time we really mean it. And so I picked up House of X #1 and was really blown away because it lived up. It was all new. It was all different. And it was something I hadn't seen in a comic book before. It took some of these big science fiction ideas that I liked from my, regular non-picture book reading and worked them into this comic book world. And I was hooked from issue #1.
I mean, I read this whole era kind of out of order. When I came back, I didn't come back with House of X #1. I kind of conflated that with the Age of X-Man series that came out. That was running concurrently with the Rosenberg era, the Uncanny Volume 5. They weren't out at the same time, but I conflated it in my head. It was just like, oh, this is another one of those. So I probably don't need to pay attention to it. It's probably something that'll never be mentioned again. House of X, right? Never be mentioned again. And I just jumped in with X-Men #1.
Which it seems like it should be a good jumping on point
right?
if you hadn't read House of X and Powers of X and realized, oh no, you missed a whole lot.
Yes, you missed the #1s when you bought that #1. It was quite the shock to the system, and anybody who knows me and my comic sickness will know that I'm very much an all or nothing kind of guy. So when I was back, I was back. It's like, okay, I'm buying. Oh, there's a Marauder. What the hell's a Marauder? Okay, sure, I'll buy it. It has an X on it. There's an X in that skull. Excalibur, okay, I'll buy it. I bought the entire thing, and I picked up Excalibur, and I see Apocalypse walking around on an island. And I'm like, what
so that
did I miss?
That didn't typically happen back in Chris Claremont's day? That wasn't a common occurrence?
Not too terribly often. He might show up to the baseball game every once in a while, but but yeah, I had no idea where I was. There were eggs that people were hatching from.
Probably some dead people up and walking around.
Yeah, banshees there smoking a pipe. I don't know what's going on. It's like the worst way to do it, but for the purposes of telling this story, it's the best way to do it because you're just thrown in, no water wings or nothing. You're just chucked in the deep end. You're in the ocean and you're trying to make sense of all of this weirdness. And, you see these characters who are familiar to you. It reminded me, and I think I may have said this elsewhere, but it was like when you got back on the first day of school, and maybe someone developed over the summer. Maybe someone got a different haircut during the summer. Maybe someone changed their style during the summer.
You recognize them, but you don't recognize them.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's just not the same. It was like being reacquainted with, old classmates, seeing like Rogue and Gambit together. It's like, oh, I know them. Yeah, it's them. Cool. I'm comfortable seeing. But wait, what? They're married and they own cats, and what's going on here? and such a shock to the system. So when I decided, it was what was it? It was the last day of August of 2020, and I was cleaning out one of the rooms in my house that was full of comics, and I had all my X stuff, and when I'm back in, I'm back in. So I spent hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars catching up on this stuff, and they just sat there because I was scared. I was scared off. I didn't know what to do, and one of the things about creating content on the internet is like you don't have free time to read the fun stuff. If you're a comic reviewer online, anything that you're reading has to be a multitasker in a way.
Yeah. I've learned that just doing the Marvel show, that those books just keep on coming every week.
They don't stop.
If I want to read something, there's probably something I should be reading, so I don't sound like an idiot when I dial up to Jim and have to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you gotta know.
If it's not the issue itself, then it's some background thing I don't know about, or some website telling me who these people were and why I should care about them.
Yeah, it's like the mail. The mail never stops, and neither do comics. They are just always coming out. So I had to try to find the happy medium, and it's like, okay, if I want to get back into this, I got to do a project. And that's where X-Lapse was born here. I filmed a little video of me flipping through all the X books I hadn't read. And the video went on for like a minute and a half. And it was just the post-Hoxpox stuff. So I was like, I gotta figure out a way to do this. And
see, that's part of the comic world that I just fundamentally don't understand. I mean, people talk about their collections, and I get that people love their collections, but I am a digital only guy.
Okay.
I have no desire to have boxes to move around and things to file. We have like a handful of like trade paperbacks and tankobons in the house, mostly because I got them for the kids.
Sure.
My younger daughter loved Squirrel Girl. Don't hold it against her. But give a girl an actual book, and she loved that.
Absolutely.
But for just reading things, I have my Amazon tablet, and I have my Marvel Unlimited and my DC, whatever their Unlimited app is called, and I can read all the comics, all the comics I want, and I never have to hold a physical book in my hand. But I know some people are really all about the collecting the physical ones, and the reading is almost secondary or tertiary.
Oh, the collecting is a huge part of it for me. But I also love the tactile feel. I love the smell. Nowadays they don't have the smell. Back in the 80s, like with your Richie Riches, they had that smell, that rotting, decomposing, awful paper smell, but it was intoxicating. It was just wonderful. And I mean, I bought a stack of old Power Man and Iron Fists out of a quarter bin the other day. And I just sat there. It's like, you smell them because it's like, it's just, and I mean, God only knows where these things have been, but it was just, it takes you back. And so the tactile feel.
The last time I held a floppy individual comic in my two hands must have been before 1985.
Wow.
Would have been 83, 84 was probably the last time I actually had a comic book in my hands.
Wow. Yeah, that's I had one in my hands like 2 seconds before we got on the air. So it's about anybody who's listening to anything I do knows how I get lost in the scenery. I chew the scenery. I get lost in the weeds. I will talk about letters pages. I'll talk about ads. I love getting into the gestalt of the entire package of the comic book. So nowadays it's a little bit less satisfying because there's so much less of a gestalt. It's like there are no letters pages anymore. The ads are all house ads. There's no fun, Captain Olympic, sell 500 things and get a chintzy microscope. Nothing like that. But still, old dog, new tricks. It just doesn't work for me. But yeah, so that day I was flipping through. I'm flipping through, flip. And I figured I got to do something about this. So that was the first time I actually sat down with House of X #1. And like you said, it may have been an even bigger shock to the system than X-Men #1 was. Seeing that without the context, but then finding out that I'm in on the ground floor at this point and I still have no context. When you read House of X #1,
right? Intentionally, it's supposed to pull the rug out from underneath you and just have the reader go along for the ride and try to figure out what's going on, and really not knowing some of the important things that are going on until 12 issues later,
Mm-hmm.
retroactively let you know what was really happening the whole time.
And anybody who's listened to anything I do knows that I don't like using the words genius. I don't like using the word brilliant because I feel like the internet has cheapened both of those to meaninglessness. And so I hasten to use them, but the way that Hox and Pox was put together, it's so rare that a series can serve so many masters and satisfy them all. You, as a new reader, were there for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of elements of that probably went over your head, but those same elements went over my head in a different way. So you were lost. I was lost. I was scared because, you find out, we'll talk about, the big shoe drop moments of Hoxpox as we go along, but there were elements there that I was wondering how much of my canon was still relevant. How much of my history
I was excited because I could tell that this Hickman guy he had a plan. He was up to something. He had a goal. He was doing something different that I wasn't seeing in any other comic books I was reading. Yeah. And it seemed like Marvel might be actually ready to let him do it.
It's true.
Which is unusual. Usually you see somebody try something different in a comic book and one of the big two comics, and they get yanked back to the status quo pretty quickly. But this felt like, I guess Marvel was just seeing not much happening with the X-Men and ready for a big swing. And Jonathan Hickman came in with a pitch, and
he did.
And he had some big ideas and some big plans, and I wanted to see where he was going to take him.
Yeah, I was looking at the freebie that came out before Hox #1, the Seeds of Tomorrow special. And,
it's funny, I don't think I ever read that one.
I missed it, and a friend of mine mailed it to me. He's like, "Oh, I thought you should have this," and I'm like, "Oh, fantastic!" And that was actually what the premise of the 300th episode of X-Lapsed was. I did like this dive on that as like a retrospective, like how did we get here? And there was an interview with Hickman where he talks about how he wanted to make the X-Men relevant again. Which, I mean, when a cynical bastard like myself says that, I'm a gatekeeper. And I'm trying to keep all the new people out. When Hickman says it, it's okay. But what he did was just that. And it really says a lot about the attitude toward the X-Men in the Marvel editorial, or just the Marvel offices, that they would let such a radical take set in. How they would trust this guy who, I mean, they've trusted Hickman with ending the Marvel Universe. They've trusted him with all that stuff in Fantastic Four. He's done a lot of stuff. So this isn't too much of a stretch, but I mean, the X-Men used to be the bread and butter, and they weren't anymore. And they haven't been for a very long time. And that was by design. Joe Quesada pushed the Avengers ahead of the X-Men, and then the Inhumans ahead of the X-Men. The X-Men were the stepchildren.
Right, all those famous movie-related reasons.
Absolutely.
They wanted some teams to get ahead and others to not so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple of years where there were no Fantastic Four books on the stands because Marvel had a temper tantrum. And the X-Men were suffering a similar fate, not quite as bad as not existing on the shelves. But
right.
It was...
wasn't getting the attention, wasn't getting the love, wasn't getting the promotional push.
Yeah, absolutely. So to swing like they did with Hickman here, it was I don't want to say a gutsy move, but it was a big swing. It was a big swing, and clearly, as you mentioned, Hickman had a plan. He had a pitch, and we'll talk about how successful that pitch was, by no fault of his, because Marvel's good at usurping.
It almost got too successful for a way, right? Because there's a certain amount of success that can happen, and you can keep doing what you want to do, right? Too little success, you get canceled.
Absolutely.
Too much success, and Marvel sees what you're doing and wants to make it even bigger, right? Blow it up into more events and spin it out into more and more series, and that's kind of what's happened with Daredevil a little bit. Sure. It's happened to a lot of books that suffer from this, where it's a great story doing what it's doing, but then they try to make it more than it was. Sure. And sometimes that just gets a little bloated, and you get something too big, too many cooks, it gets too generic, where the Hoxpox pitch was a very specific Jonathan Hickman pitch, and what it was straight up was really interesting.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So now that we've got all that back into, let's talk about what was actually going on in House of X and what made it so special.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like we said, there was a plan here, and there was a plan to turn a lot of things on their ear. There were several revelations made, and each one, I was, yeah. I mean, you ever like see something that you don't want to see, like a direction is gone in a story or in a show.
Only in the mirror every morning, Chris. Only every morning.
You should see mine. But you'll see something happening, and it'll kind of be like a car wreck in the making, and you're like, I don't want to see this. I don't want this to happen. I know the direction we're going, and then it works, and you have this weird,
that's a fun feeling.
You have this like dissonance, like it's like, okay, it worked. I'm happy it worked, but I hate that it worked too. You know, I hate that it made sense.
You son of a gun, I'd love it.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I hate it. You know, and those were. I mean, there was one of the things I say a lot is like shoe drops. You know, the shoe's going to drop, and there was a torrential downpour of shoes during Hoxpox, and they were all very well done. As much as I hated to admit it when I read it the first time, because I was just, you know, this is not my X-Men. This is not the X-Men. What are you doing?
Right.
And then it works.
There's some things you read where you know up front, I'm going to hate it. I'm only reading to find out specifically how I'm going to hate it.
I need to know
the
what
details.
What am I going to post on Twitter, damn it? I need to know.
Right.
But
I know I'm angry about something.
My hair is on fire. I'm going to find out why.
Right.
But we had a lot of revelations here. And among them, I mean, there are so many. I can't even tell. These are like in no particular order, because, I mean, to some of us, certain ones are going to carry more weight than the others.
But there's a few big ones.
Sure. Like one of the biggies here is we were joking earlier about this weird associate of the X-Men, Maura Mctaggart. What is she up to? Isn't she dead? She's been dead for 20 years. She's been dead for a long time.
That was a character. It was a name I knew. I don't even say I knew the character. I knew it was a name of somebody who was kind of tangentially associated with these mutant people. And that is all I knew. So when there was a change in her status quo, I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's kind of interesting. But it didn't hit me the way I'm sure it hit people like you.
Yes, because for those who are Krakoan only, Maura Mctaggart was the human ally of the X-Men. She was a researcher, a scientist, a Nobel Prize winner. She operated out of an island called Muir Island, where she studied mutants, and she had a son who was a unstable mutant, not Legion. Just in case anybody gets that confused, like a lot of the writers do. This is Proteus.
The other one, right?
It's Proteus. We'll talk about him probably in a little bit. But she was she was notable for being human. She was notable for not hate. There was no fear and hate coming from her. You know,
right.
She was
like April O'Neil. She wasn't a turtle, but she hung out with the turtles.
She had no shell, but
it's funny. I do associate Maura Mctaggart with April O'Neil.
I will now too.
They fill the same slot.
I will now too. Yeah, but she had perished back in a story called Dream's End. Now this was in the late 1990s, maybe the turn of the century. This was Chris Claremont.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah. This was Chris Claremont's last story from his second run with the books, the bad one, the bad run. That's not the good one, the bad one. But she died of something called the legacy virus. That was important because the legacy virus was to use the quick and dirty of it. It's mutant AIDS, basically. It was a disease, a fatal disease, an uncurable disease, released by Strife at the end of the Executioner song. Strife is we're getting in the weeds here. Strife is the other Cable, the bad Cable, the one with the pointy helmet.
Right.
It's weird. You can't tell an X-Men story without digging so deep into the dirt. And it's when you get to the bottom, you don't even know where you were. So, yes, Strife released this thing, Legacy Virus. And it was there in the background from 1993 to around the turn of the century. And it only cropped up every once in a while to remind us that it was there and that Beast hadn't cured it yet. Occasionally you see Beast like looking at a test tube just to remind us that,
Mhm.
oh yeah, I haven't forgotten about it. But not a whole
Right,
lot
just like
happened.
Reed Richard was always going to cure the thing,
Of course.
but he never
Of
actually
course.
could. But he was always working
He's
on it. It
always
was
there.
always
He's got the
one of his
notepad.
top
Yeah, he's got the
priorities.
notepad. He's got the clipboard. But it claimed the lives of a few notable people. Revanche, Quanon, the other Betsy Braddock body swap deal. She died of the legacy virus.
I
Ilyana
don't think I knew
Rasputin,
that.
Magic. She
Oh,
died
wow.
of the legacy virus. I believe Pyro died of the legacy virus twice. It was the
The
90s.
same Pyro or two different
Same
Pyros?
Pyro. It was the 90s.
Same Pyro. Okay.
I may be
Yeah,
mistaken, but I think he died more than once. Mastermind died of it. It killed a few people. But it never really amounted to a storyline.
Mhm.
Well, Maura Mctaggart found a cure, which, I mean, we can draw parallels to her finding a cure later on. But she was killed before she got the chance to use it. And the thing was, she had the legacy virus. She was notable for being the first human to have the legacy virus, which, I mean, the story possibilities there are insane because you got to figure the X-Men weren't. This wasn't on the front page of the X-Men Gazette. You know, oh, there's mutant AIDS out there. Don't worry about it, humans. It doesn't affect you,
Right.
until it does. So we were led to believe Moira's a human. She's got the legacy virus. Uh-oh. You know, business just picked up. And then, like, the next month, they cured it. So, really much ado about nothing. She died. Colossus injected it into himself, killing himself, curing the virus, yada, yada, yada.
Right. But so she stayed dead in comics until
Just now.
House of X #1?
Mm-hmm. She was
Wow,
gone.
okay.
She was gone. And then in House of X #2, well, we know she was revealed as being not a human at all, but a mutant. And not only a mutant, but a mutant she was in her 10th life. And
So she had a crazy mutant power,
Yes.
which, you know, I'm used to mutant powers being okay. You can jump
yeah.
really high, usually mostly physical type stuff, maybe some mental manipulation, but her power is nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost universe breaking nuts. The kind of thing that if an author is going to do this with a character, they better really know what they're doing, or the whole thing is just going to collapse because it's so big.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to her is when she dies, she doesn't just resurrect. When she dies, the whole darn universe
resets to her.
Stops.
Yeah,
resets, go back to her conception, I guess, because it goes back to her in the womb, and everything happens exactly the same, except Moira knows before she's even born everything that happened in her previous life or eventually lives.
Yeah.
So she remembers her first time around.
Mm-hmm.
So her very first life was a totally mundane, normal, like a wife and mother raising kids, having some basic, usual, everyday kind of problems, kind of life. She died at some sort of a ripe old age.
In her sleep, peacefully.
In her sleep. Mm-hmm. Completely not the kind of story you would ever read about in a comic book, unless it's maybe one of those manga slice of life things. But, you know, just boring life. And then she finds herself back in her life too. And now she knows some stuff. So her first 9 lives are all about her hooking up with the mutants at different times, you know, meeting up with Professor X, seeking him out or just running into him, and trying to, now that she knows she's a mutant, she figures that out real quick, figuring out how can she help her people win or at least survive.
Yeah.
So she tries all these things. Sometimes she works with Professor X and tries to be peace and love, and that doesn't work out so well. The big old robots come and get them. Sometimes she tries to be more militant and kind of hide away, and that doesn't work. Sometimes she goes and she works with Magneto, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and that doesn't work either. Even one time she hooks up with Apocalypse himself, which you can only imagine. You could have a whole series set in that lifetime, and crazy things happen there. And we find that doesn't work either. But those first 9 lives, when we first read this the first time, and I know you did too, a lot of us were trying to speculate, well, maybe all the things we thought we knew happened in
different lives,
Marvel history and X-Men history, maybe they happened in one of these previous lives. But no, all the things we know still happened. They still happened, at least the ones that haven't been retconned away already. They still happened in Moira's 10th and current life. Yeah. So all that's still a going concern. And in this life, she and Professor X and Magneto were kind of communicating behind the scenes this whole time until it was time to put their big plan forward.
Exactly.
And there's an amazing scene in House of X where we see her meeting Professor X for the first time in her 10th life. And she just says basically to him, okay, you want to know what's going on? I know what you can do. Read my mind. And we get these amazing cinematic widescreen panels of just the truth of Moira's lives dawning on Professor X. And when we see this the first time, we don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, this is before.
All we know was that he's reading her mind, and his face is just going nuts. Like he can't believe what he's reading, what he's learning. And he's almost like an audience surrogate because he's learning these crazy things right before we do. Exactly. And it's really amazing.
Oh, yes. And back to that Seeds of Tomorrow freebie there, that page where they're looking at each other at the fair or whatever, at the bench. They say that that's the most important page in X-Men history. And I mean, as it stands now, given the new status quo, it there's an argument to be made that this changes everything. It changes everything we thought we knew. And I mean, that's a Marvel trope. Everything you thought you knew was wrong. Here, damn it, they made it work. They figured it out.
That's a big check to write, but they managed to cash it.
They did. And Maura here, I say Moira, I'll say them both probably. But she knows some of her lives she lived, 20, 30 years. Some of her life she lived thousands of years or hundreds of years. I think it was 1,000 total. But she knows a lot. She has centuries worth of knowledge and experience that she just poured into Professor X's head. And for all he knew, she was some, 20-something, 30-something, just talking to him.
Right.
And no, indeed.
He was expecting a Dixie cup full of water, and he just drank the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly. So huge revelations there. Huge shoe drop moments where, and the way they did it, like you said, we had no idea what it meant. It was just, here's the torrent, figure it out. And of course, they walk us through some of the lives right then and there. But it takes a little bit to realize exactly what it is that we're getting. It's it's like drinking something in the dark here, and you think it's soda, but it's actually iced tea. And it's like it doesn't taste bad, but it's like, woof, what is that? It's very, very unsettling. And like I said, for someone like me who's so hyper and anally protective of my continuity, I was dumbfounded. It was one of those situations where I didn't know if I wanted to pick up the next issue and read it or just throw the one across the room and say, done. Done. No more. But I kept on, and I'm glad that I did because we got a lot more stuff here. Now, I mean, Maura, she's back to life over and over again. She finds out here that in the future, there's always something that causes the mutants to lose.
Right. It varies all the time. It could be just the regular government forces hunting down the mutants. It could be crazy, far future. What do they call neo-humans? What do they call those people? Post-humans, yes. Post-humans. It could be robots. Yep. It could be aliens. But it's always something, damn it. And no matter what she tries, you can imagine just how frustrated you'd be living these hundreds and thousands of years, and something always gets in the way. So you can see why she might be a little bitter.
Yes, she's a little irked, but because like she tries different things. The post-humans. I mean, they're kind of symbolized by the children of the vault. We'll get into them maybe another time. The phalanx, hive mind, the ascension, stuff like that. She tries
big Hickman-y ideas.
Yes, which means like very little personality, but really cool ideas. You have
very true.
You have sometimes where the mutants team up with the humans to face on the post-humanity, whatever, the robots. Sometimes they win that, sometimes they lose that. But when they win that, the humans turn on them. Sometimes the humans turn on them immediately. It's really very, very interesting the way it's done here, because it sounds like we're telling the same story over and over again, but the nuances there are different, and
Yeah, it reminds me of some of those time loop movies and stories that become popular, like the Happy Death Day is a good one, or all these other ones or even Groundhog Day, where he does the same thing over and over again, slightly different, trying to get it right.
Sure. And the other X factor there, not, no pun intended, is it's a very different Maura each time. She has the experiences. She's not the same Maura in Life 2 as she was in Life 3. There's a progression there. Lessons learned, not falling into the same traps. Sometimes falling into the same traps on purpose because you want to try a different way out. It's very, very, very well done. It's almost a shame we didn't get more of it, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad we didn't because we got enough, I think. Very, very interesting.
Right. Just enough to let us know what happened without putting so many details in that we'd catch them in a slip.
Especially with how big and bloated the line was going to get, where it's very easy to contradict in a shared fiction, I think.
So I guess that the next big thing is we've got Moira back. She's in contact with Professor X, and they need to try something really different because nothing else has worked. And for reasons we may or may not get to, this is possibly Moira's last chance. She's been resurrecting. Might not happen again. Don't worry about why, but this may be it. So the big thing they're trying this time is Krakoa. Now, I had read at some point. I read Giant Size X-Men #1.
Terrible issue.
It's one of the, when you're new to comics, that is one of the things people say. Okay, this is one of the big ones. Go read it. So if you've read any X-Men things or any Marvel things, you know about Krakoa. It's the island that walks like a man. It's sometimes called the mutant. Sometimes they kind of soft pedal whether it's a mutant or just kind of a weird old island. But what they've done is they said, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to team up with Krakoa. So Professor X goes there. He brings our good old buddy Doug, who can talk to everybody, even islands. And they make a deal. They say, okay, we're going to live on Krakoa. We're going to bring all the mutants here, or at least allow all the mutants to come here. They don't have to. And Krakoa actually feeds on like life energy. So, which can be really bad if there's only 2 mutants on the island. But if you've got hundreds, thousands, millions of them, it's like a little bit of tax, you don't even notice. So it'll work out for Krakoa and it'll give the mutants a homeland. It feels very real world political, but not lampshading it the way a lot of current day comics might. We're not saying, oh, look, we're just like whatever country you want to name. Yeah. Right. But this is a place that all mutants have a right to come home to.
Yes.
And this is going to be where we set up our mutant country, our mutant nation. They've never been a nation before. They've had an island where they kind of hit out. They've had some pockets of places. They've had a mansion in upstate New York, but now they have their own nation. And that's going to be what's different this time.
Sure. I mean, we've had things like Genosha, which were largely mutant nations and everything but name. But we've also had the Utopia and stuff like that. But this is, like you said, this is the first time where the actual goal is not just communion, not just bringing everyone together, but presenting themselves as a one people. And it's another thing where, I mean, it was House of X #5, I believe, where we see bad guys showing up. We see like Professor X like shaking hands with Apocalypse, which that should never happen, but it works. It works.
I think I had muted myself.
There you are.
Sorry about that. We'll have our editor take that out later. So why don't you come back and where you were?
Okay. So I think it was House of X #5 where Apocalypse shows up on the island. Him and Professor X shake hands, which is something that should never happen. They're so opposed to each other's worldview, the view of mutantdom, the view of everything, that it really shouldn't work. And we might get into the weeds about what it means to be a society at some point. But,
right. This is very much symbolic of a completely new start.
Yes.
When we say all the mutants can come to Krakoa, we mean all the damn mutants. The good ones, the bad ones, the ugly ones, the ones who have tried to murder the entire world 12 times over. You're all allowed in because you're a mutant. You can come here.
And you have amnesty from your crimes.
Right. So we've got this island set up, and I guess some of the mutants know about it already. I'm sure he brings in his closest compatriots first, and then Professor X announces this to the world.
Yeah.
He sends, it's like when you hit reply all on an email to the entire company you work for by accident, but he does it on purpose. He sends this psychic voicemail to everyone in the whole world, and he tells them, Krakoa is our new island. We are the mutants, and we're going to live there, and you're going to recognize us.
Yes.
We're not against you. We're not making war on the world, but we are what comes next, and this is where we're going to start. Now, he says to them, this is going to be good for you. This is going to be good for you because here on Krakoa, we have stuff you want. We don't just have a stick to beat you with. We have these amazingly tasty carrots. And these carrots are these 3 Krakoan meds, 3 different kinds. Number 1, every person who takes this, their life gets extended by 5 years. We don't know the details of that one, whether you have to take when you're old or young. Doesn't really matter. The idea is that humanity, however old you're going to get, you get 5 more years, like 1,600 more days of life. Don't you want that? If you play nice with us, you get 5 more years of life. Number 2, we have this kind of a super antibiotic, cures all kinds of diseases. So on top of those 5 more years of healthy life, if you have cancer, if you have all sorts of awful things, this just makes that go away. And don't you want that to happen? And number 3 is the brain medicine. If you have Alzheimer's or any of these other kind of nervous system,
mental malady,
horrible maladies, this will fix that. And all you have to do for your country to have access to purchase these at a very reasonable rate, I'm sure, all you have to do is recognize our existence, recognize us as a nation, our sovereignty, and go along with a little bit of amnesty, a little bit of free trade, let us be, let us continue. And that's all. And you do that, and you get to have these great things. And almost all the countries of the world say, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I mean, can you blame them? That's a pretty killer deal. So yeah, a lot of them do. A lot of the the Marvel countries, they have a little bit of a problem with it, but that makes sense.
Right. You got to throw in a few holdouts. It was some like a South American country. Is it not? Was it Terra Verde?
Yeah, Terra Verde. Because they're working on their own, right, which we find out later on. But Wakanda, they already have their own deal. They're not really against the mutants, but they don't need the meds. They don't need the treaty.
Vibranium pills. I don't know how that works. Something like that. And Russia, because Russia's the designated evil country. Yeah. North Korea, some place like that where you'd say, yeah, they're not going to play along.
Of course.
So that is the new status quo as far as So when people talk about the Krakoan era, that is what they mean. Where all the mutants, not all the mutants, but that is the locus of the mutant world. That's the center of everything. That's where a lot of our stories happen, or at least emanate out.
Sure. Absolutely. And it's another one of those things where, the meds, it's as we move forward, they're almost an afterthought. They get mentioned; they're still a thing. They're just not as important a thing as I think we thought they were going to be. At least I thought they were going to be. More important than they were.
I guess it's always important in the background. They're not as foregrounded. Usually.
Sure.
It's just that's why no one has forthrightly attacked Krakoa as an open country, right? That's why everyone's kind of okay with this weird old thing happening.
Yeah, just letting it.
So I think that's like a presupposition to make this possible. Here's what you got.
There you go. And another big shoe drop moment was
there's more.
Yeah, the thing with the gold balls. The thing with the gold balls.
One of the crazy joke characters invented by Brian Michael Bendis is now one of the five most important mutants in the entire world. And that's because he's part of this group that has made death just not be a thing for mutants anymore. Sure, regular people, they get 5 more years. Mutants get infinity more years as long as this system holds up.
For sure.
And the way it works is these crazy gold balls that he just shoots out of his chest are actually eggs. Which is weird. And now his name is Egg. And he, with some other mutants, can do this crazy thing where all you need is one of his eggs. You need some DNA of the mutant you want to bring back. And hey, Mr. Sinister's around. He's got all the DNA because that's the kind of crazy SOB that he is. So we bring him in. You need a backup of the mutant's mind and possibly soul, spirit, but don't think about that part too hard, maybe. Mm-hmm. And that's all in Cerebro because they've been backed up from that for decades now. You put those together and you get a gold ball. You get the genetics in there. And then you hand it over to who are these other 4 members of this?
We've got Hope.
This Pentaverate.
We've got Hope Summers. We've got Tempest, another Bendis character. Elixir from the new X-Men. And Proteus, the aforementioned Proteus, Maura Mctaggart's son, who doesn't know she's A, a mutant, and B, alive. So he is there to... because he's a reality warper. So you need a little bit.
He makes the eggs viable.
Yeah,
something like
you need to warp reality a little bit to make this whole thing fly. But you got Hope there. You've got Tempest who can speed up time. You can you bring the character to the ripeness that you want them before they hatch from the gold ball. It's an Elixir is basically a healer, so it's a very interesting way to do this, where, I mean, Hickman is known for the high concept for the pseudoscience, the comic book science, but here's a situation where, I mean, if we go by where the gold ball lays, you really can't poke too many holes in it, unless you're using a diamond-tipped syringe, I guess.
It raises a lot of questions, but not the kind of questions that make you think, oh, that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
It's the kind of questions that make you think, oh, should they
work?
Really be doing that?
Yeah, should you
right.
do
It's
that?
It's the Jurassic Park issue, right? They worked so hard seeing if they could. They didn't stop to think if they should.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's one of the things that it's another one of those background things, just like the meds. It's a background thing there's a, no pun intended, there's a sinisterness on Krakoa. The entire era is very, very ominous. I've compared it to the first 10 minutes of a Twilight Zone, before the really bad ending comes in.
Right, right before the commercial.
Right before the humans did it, the usual Rod Serling ending.
It's a cookbook.
Yes, there you go. So it's like this weird, unsettling feeling that you get from...
It's a great storytelling gimmick, too, because we've all been saying for years, in comic book, death doesn't matter. Right, they'll be brought back next time anyway. The one that always sticks with me is Jane Foster Thor, who was a much better story than I ever thought that was going to be. It was a lot of fun, but when she died, she came back in the same damn issue. It was like 2 pages later. So there's really no drama anymore to killing off a character. So it was like very metatextual. Hickman saying, yeah, I agree. Death doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it on panel on the page and I'm going to make it right here. Death doesn't matter officially. Signed, sealed, delivered. It doesn't.
Absolutely.
And that's how he can bring back Banshee. He could bring back any character he would ever want to play with, more or less, with some wrinkles.
Sure.
But the question's always going to be all these philosophical questions, like when they come back, sure, they look the same. They have the same genes. They have the same memories up to whenever Cerebro last uploaded them, last backed them up. Does that really count as being the same person? Would I think of that? Would I be okay dying if I know someone who looks and thinks just like me is going to come back two days later? Is that resurrection or is it just
cloning
somebody else?
It's true. There are a lot of going to the just the cheapening of death overall before Hoxpox here. I remember Bill Jemas, who was I think his title was president of Marvel, or he was up there. He came
one of the big ones, right?
He came in around 2001 or so, and one of the things he said is he wanted to get away from doing comics that you didn't need anymore, and he pointed to one in particular, and it was a miniseries by Joseph Harris called X-Men: The Search for Cyclops, because Cyclops had just died.
Okay,
and Bill Jemas says, we know Cyclops is coming back. Why did we kill him in the first place? And why are we doing a miniseries called The Search for Cyclops? The book was still coming out at the time, which hurt poor Mr. Harris. But there's a point there. It's like we know these characters are going to come back. And like you said, like you put it there, Now that's not even a worry anymore. We've taken the comic book cliffhanger off the table, which, in theory, gives us a whole lot of other toys to play with. You know, we're not worried about Spider-Man being unmasked anymore.
It does. It's one of those tricks that, in the hands of a skilled writer who is going to play fair and going to play by the new rules, who has a vision, right, could really make that super interesting. Absolutely. Because now you can't do the cheap last panel, oh, is the hero going to die anymore? Because who cares if the hero dies or not? If they don't die, fine. Mm-hmm. If they die, fine, we're going to bring them back anyway. So it forces the writer to do something cleverer, something different.
Be a little bit more creative. Find somewhere else the stakes can be. You know,
it takes away the cheap hit.
Absolutely, and it's something they managed to stick to for 5 minutes or so. I mean,
it comes and goes.
We've abused the death and resurrection a time or two, to the point where death, the cliffhangers are still there even today. We get these death cliffhangers and we wonder why. But Singular Vision being what it is, this had the potential to be very, very interesting if they let it be, I guess. But so we take the death off the table. Mm-hmm. What happens to these characters? What happens when a group of X-Men go to the Orcus satellite and die?
Oh yeah, this was really brilliant, because as we read it in the book, because we just told you now, death doesn't matter anymore, but that's not on page 1 of the book. That's in 5. I don't know which issue.
House of X5.
That's in 5. House of X5. So most, like 80% of the way through the whole series, we learn this huge thing that's been happening. We just didn't know as we read it, because we saw that. So the humans have this space station where they're going to a master mother mold, where they're going to breed these super killer robots. This the big hunter. What's the name? Nimrod, right? They're going to breed a Nimrod, and Moira knows, because every life she's lived, once Nimrod exists,
done deal.
It's over. Forget it. Forget trying anything else. It's over. So before this island can even get started, they have to get rid of this mother mold. So they send this strike force out there. I know it's Cyclops and Jean Grey and Wolverine, Angel,
Mystique,
right? And so they go, and their job is to go and release these 4. It's very video gamey. There's 4 places where this giant robot head is connected to this satellite, and they need to release all 4 of them, and then the thing will fall into the sun.
Sure.
So they do this, and long story short, they succeed, but they all die in the process. Die heroically, amazingly heroically, sacrificing themselves for the good of the mutant nation of Krakoa. And these were all the ones I knew, basically. Right. These were the names. I didn't know the crazy lady with the big old killer fingers. I didn't know. Right. Didn't know her. I didn't know her. But most of the others, like the ones I knew other than Professor X, they all seemed like they were dead. And I'm thinking, we're kicking off a new era of the X-Men. How can he be killing off? And that was the talk of all the comic book people for that whole week. How could this possibly be? Is this going to be in an earlier life of Moira? Is this going to be an illusion or something going? What could possibly be going on? And that's when it came back. And then we saw that an earlier scene where we saw something going on with Professor X and these goopy biological looking humanoids and people crawling down on the ground. We saw that way back in the first issue. Didn't know what it was. Page 1. Now we see that was Cyclops coming back after this mission. That was Wolverine coming back, and Jean Grey. That was the showing us on panel.
First on panel.
Death doesn't matter. Yes, we're sad that they died, because it must have been rough to go through all that, but it's not that sad, because here they are again. And that's when we got our first view of what mutant resurrection looks like, as not just a technological, a biological process,
as a societal ritual.
An event, a ritual, yes, because all these people are taken out, still kind of goopy and naked, a little gross, but taken out in front of the gathered Krakoan crowd and presented to them as saying, do you recognize this person? Who are they? they are mutant.
And they chant
And
mutant.
It
mutant,
is
mutant.
It is exultant, and it is exciting, and it is joyful, but it's also, at least for those of us reading it on the outside,
a little horrifying.
really, really creepy.
Yeah, a little horrifying.
It is cultish.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's
and we're amazed, but we're also going, oh, this seems wrong, which is really the theme that Hickman balanced really well.
Absolutely.
For a lot of this whole run, is that this is amazing, but it's something, a deep undercurrent of something like this should not be happening.
Yeah.
And it's clearly on purpose.
Oh, 100%.
I don't know that all the other writers bought into that or care about that balanced dichotomy, but at least it was there from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that's where we first super saw it on panel.
Yeah, and that's just it's like a really true indictment of this being a victim of its own success, because that's not something with a long shelf life. That story is a story, and it's a story worth telling, and it's a story worth reading, but it's not one that's going to last for 5, 6, 7 years.
It feels like an indie pitch, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like if you were creating your own 12-issue limited series for Dark Horse or something, and you want to talk about this crazy idea about death not mattering, that would be fun, but it wouldn't have the emotional resonance if it's just, here's some characters I created myself.
Yeah, here's Bob.
What gives it that emotional resonance is this happening to Nightcrawler.
Characters have been around for decades.
And Wolverine and these characters there. Right. Yeah. So it's this amazing synthesis, this difficult, dangerous, they still don't know if they're really going to pull it off, synthesis of this big indie idea with these beloved corporate IP.
Absolutely. So so you have this.
So death for the mutants is no longer really a thing as long as you don't worry about some of these philosophical, trivia, like whether it's really you or not. And in the hands of a really talented, dedicated writer who completely commits to the bit, like Hickman commits to the bit, in those kind of hands, that's an amazing new way of opening up the stories. As the line expands and kind of wanders off, and you get more cooks adding to the broth, they don't always commit entirely, but that's down the road 8 shows.
Another day.
But it's this great, cool idea. Now, if death is no longer really that important a thing, then there's going to be some mutants out there who kind of see it as better than just okay. It's like actually a pretty good option, right?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, we know there's all these millions of mutants out there who don't feel like mutants at all anymore, because Wanda, she had her little breakdown and she said no more mutants, and she made most of the mutants of the whole world 14 million, some crazy millions of number.
There were only 198 left.
Right. All except for that, all those other mutants were essentially demutanted. So they're out there, most of them still alive, presumably, and they might be thinking to themselves, hey, sure, I mean, I'm still alive now, that's all right, but wouldn't it be better to be alive and still be able to do whatever my crazy mutant power was, whether it was flying or shooting laser beams out of my ear or, seeing crazy colors no one else can see? I would like to get that back. And if I can be brought back, they're not going to bring me back all screwed up the way I am now. They're not going to bring me back with a scar on my knee and, a missing eye. They're going to bring me back as my sexiest self, and I'll have my full powers back like I used to. So maybe I just see that volcano over there. I take a little dip in that and poof, I should be back. So this is a problem for Krakoa because they don't want 14 million mutants just suddenly taking a long walk off a short pier and washing up in the mundane world. That's bad for PR. Plus, we can only, the 5 who are bringing back these people, they can only do so many a day, right? We don't know how many exactly, but they can't do it a million at a time. So we need.
I think someone did like a formula on how long it would take for them just to bring back the mutants lost in Cassandra Nova's raid, in Genosha, and it was something like 1,000 years. It would take like 1,000 years to bring them all back. So. You kill yourself. You show that you devalue life even more than comics books do.
You're probably not going to the front. In fact, you're definitely not going to the front of the queue. They have a lot of weird old dead mutants to bring back first.
Yeah.
Now, But there's all these people who really want this. So Krakoa has to come up with, by Krakoa, I mean the mutant society has to come up with a way of dealing with the situation. And what they come up with is horrifically brilliant. It's called the Crucible. And what it comes down to is if you want your powers back, you can get them, but you have to earn it. You can't just die any old way. You have to literally fight for them in the arena. So you'll be in this huge, ancient Roman kind of arena with all your loved ones and friends around you cheering and eating popcorn and watching you as you fight. And you don't just fight, at least at first, you'll be fighting the baddest mother mutant out there who's killed and killed and killed for thousands of years. You'll be fighting Apocalypse himself. He is in charge of the Crucible. Yep. And you're given some sort of weapon, but it doesn't matter because you're a depowered mutant. You're fighting Apocalypse. You're not going to win. We know you're not going to win. If you did win, I don't even know what they would do. It would be the dog who caught the car. Who could even tell
that story?
Right.
Yeah.
What would happen? We don't know. But you're going to die, but you need to die on your feet like a mutant. And if you do that, you will be brought back post-haste, front of the queue, maybe that same day, maybe the next day, but you will be back fully powered, just the way you were before Wanda screwed everything up. And this is presented in, what did you say it was, X-Men number 7?
Number 7.
So pretty early on in the X-Men run, this is presented as, here's that solution to that problem. And it's shown to be this wonderful, amazing, triumphant thing to pretty much everyone actually involved, right? No, there's not a lot of questions being raised. We, the readers, are thinking, oh, this isn't right. This is creepy. This is culty. And almost no one else in the book is thinking anything like this, except who we getting as our point of view character now, kind of raising these audience questions.
Nightcrawler is our guy.
Nightcrawler, our lovable, furry blue teleporting friend who's, he's often been the conscience or the heart or, the person who actually is rare in comic books to be shown as a person with religion who's not just, some crazy evil preacher somewhere. His religion makes him better. And he would be someone who would not just go along with this like everyone else. So Hickman chooses a good point of view character to raise these questions. He doesn't stop it. In fact, he's asked to participate in it at some point, and he doesn't stop it, but he recognizes that this isn't quite right. That there's, again, under this amazing, colorful, successful, triumphant surface of Krakoa, there's something deeply wrong going on, not very far underneath.
No, and it's right under the surface, especially when the Crucible's involved. The Crucible, I mean, it happened very early, and I don't think I go more than a couple of episodes of X-Lapse without bringing it back up, because it is that important to not only the era, but the society that's being built here. It's one of the things that Simon Spurrier did so well in Way of X, which was the Nightcrawler-focused series. It was focused a lot on the 3 laws of Krakoa, which we'll get to in a bit. But Spurrier did was he gave us the definition of what it was to be a society. I mean, you and I are both Americans, right?
That's true.
There are commonalities between us. There are differences between us. But society is almost built in with things like rituals. I mean, we both don't have to celebrate Christmas, but we know Christmas is there. Right.
It's those things about that we share that we don't even really think about, this kind of background assumption to the way the world works, the way society works, that just, we can talk to each other and just know that without having to ever question it. And Krakoa doesn't have that yet. But
that's what they're building.
But Hickman and Spurrier and some of these writers realize that if they're going to be a true nation and a people, they need to build these things from scratch. And they kind of need to do it fast. They can't evolve this over hundreds and thousands of years like most other societies. They need to kind of,
they need to
do it now. Exactly.
Yeah, it needs to be fast-tracked. And things like the Crucible, whether they agree with it or disagree with it, it's a commonality. It's a huge thing that all the mutants on Krakoa know of. And it's something that they're not necessarily united on, but they know of it. It's something that defines a bit of the New Mutant culture. And it's almost, I mean, it's brilliant in a way, because it is just, it's astonishingly, it's baffling that this is something that we're reading in a superhero comic. With all the philosophical questions on whether or not, I mean, it's euthanasia, without drawing a line under it.
Oh, I think suicide. It's pretty much, the line is pretty clearly drawn under it. No one says that word.
Yeah, they're not saying it, but it's
euthanasia, but euthanasia with resurrection.
Yeah.
Right. It's not saying you're better off dead. It's saying you're better off back to life.
Back to what you used to be. Yeah. So it's a phenomenally weird bit of business there. What we talked about a bit earlier was another thing that unites a society: laws.
Yes,
a ruling class, a power structure.
Right. You can't have. Some societies in the past have had something like a direct democracy where all the people kind of vote on stuff. But if we're really going to bring back all these millions of mutants, that's not going to work here. And also, it's not going to work for a work of fiction where we want to watch these arguments happen somewhere. So we need some collection of a reasonable number of representative characters who say all the representative points of view and kind of make these decisions for how the society is going to run itself. And what Hickman comes up for that is called the Quiet Council. And I never really thought about why it's called the Quiet Council. There's nothing particularly quiet about it. I'm sure he just thought it sounded cool. So that's what he went with. And that's what we go with. So, and we don't really know where this came from. It doesn't seem like there was ever a referendum where all the mutants voted on it. It's just kind of presented to us as this is going to be the new government of Krakoa. And I just figure that all the other mutants are having a good enough time, partying here on the island and down at the bars.
It's a very decadent place.
At least for now, Charles made this thing happen. Things are so good. Why make waves? He says it's the government. Okay, it's the government. Does it really matter? Just give me another drink.
Yeah, it's almost like, if you have like a clubhouse in your backyard and you elect yourself president, and like your dog is your guard, that's how they set it up here. They have their government, they have their captains, their military. It's just a group of folks who were not elected into positions. They just decided that this is the direction they were going to go.
And they do a good job of getting kind of all this sort of points of view you might want to have on
a lot
here.
of useful individuals.
At least
convenient
it
folks.
Feels representative. If they only took like the original 5 and all the heroes and said they're the government, that would feel kind of phony, because that's not the society we're building here. We're bringing all the mutants. All the mutants need to be represented. So we have 12 people. We have the first 3 who come in are going to be Professor X, of course, and his good old buddy/enemy Magneto. And alongside them, we have Apocalypse. And so there's not really a first among equals exactly, at least not officially, but this group seems to be the ones who are really making the decisions, and they just kind of have to wrangle everybody else along. So those are our first big 3.
And they're also the public face of Krakoa. We see them in an early issue of X-Men. I think it's number 3 or 4, where they go to like an international, like a global summit to chat up some other diplomats and ambassadors and stuff, and
have a fancy dinner, talk about fancy diplomatic things,
talk about ending the Bronze Age with your fists. So that was the public face. There was that quadrant of the Quiet Council: Xavier, Magneto, and Apocalypse. Which seeing Apocalypse in a suit is something worth paying for.
Indeed, you can't just buy that off the rack.
No. That thing's fitted. That's a jumbo carnation abomination. If I've ever seen.
No, not jumbo. Leave him out of this.
But we have 3 other quadrants to get to, and they are representative of various things. One that's near and dear to many of us is basically the X-Men quadrant. You have Storm, Nightcrawler, and Jean Grey. You can't really have an X-Men without one, if not 2, if not all 3 of those to make it feel
They're the ones to make your casual readers, kind of like me. Those are the ones I'd heard about before, right? Sure. Oh yeah, those are the X-Men. So clearly they have to be part of this governing council, so they should be there.
Absolutely. Then you get the weirdos. You get the oddballs here. Useful people. Useful people. You get Mr. Sinister, who we know has the DNA bank, so
Right.
he's important. You have
Got to keep
Mystique.
him in. If he runs off with that, they're kind of SOL. So got to keep crazy guy happy.
You got to keep sassy Sinister happy. You got Mystique there, who will become very important as this era rolls on. And you also get Exodus. Now, Exodus is interesting because he is probably, if we were to consider all the Quiet Council people A and B listers, he's like a C or a D.
He was somebody I had never heard of. He doesn't get a whole lot of page time in any of the books so far. He's probably, of all the original Quiet Council members, he's the one we hear from the least.
He's the quietest.
He is the quietest of the Quiet Council, for sure.
But he's also the most talkative because he is kind of the Ministry of Truth. He is the one who indoctrinates. He's the one who gets the children and talks about the great pretender, the enemy, Wanda.
That's true.
He's the one who is kind of informing the the impressionable youth of Krakoa as to what's really going on. Why are we here, and what's the benefit of not being there? And I guess he does a decent enough job at it. He's still there. So that's our third quadrant. Our fourth quadrant is our Hellfire quadrant, which is predicated on a lot of things. The magic meds is one of them.
They have several jobs in this new world. They're part of the whole getting the buying and selling of this new magic medicine that's going to let the new nation of Krakoa really exist in the real-ish kind of world.
Sure.
So they're doing that, and they're also doing some behind-the-scenes smuggling to places where you're not officially allowed to sell these meds. And they're also doing some rescuing of mutants who can't legally or easily come to Krakoa who really want to get there. So that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. They're also planning parties, and they have a distillery. It's a whole thing.
All important things, right?
Yes. And that is, of course, Emma Frost, because you can't have an X-Men book without Emma Frost in it, apparently. You also have Sebastian Shaw, and then there was the secret, 12th member here, call me Kate, Kitty Pryde, as the Red Queen.
Right. We found out about that a few issues into the actual run of it. Right. But sure, she's just
number 2. Yeah. So it wasn't too long we were waiting. I remember theorizing that it was going to be Maura, thinking that we're really going to hit the ground running. And no. Maura,
no, we kept waiting for Moira to show up. Right? That was a long con they were pulling. So we have those 12. Now we also have, we haven't said Cyclops because he's not actually on the council, but he's kind of part of the official military wing. He's the head of the captains.
He's the captain commander.
And we also haven't mentioned the other really important part of this council, Krakoa itself. Yeah, Douglas and Krakoa, because none of this happens if Krakoa ain't happy, right? We said we need Sinister because he has the DNA. Krakoa is the nation. Literally, he is the place where all this takes place. If Krakoa, he has a veto, right? If he says no, the answer is no matter what anybody else says.
Yeah, it could be 12 to 1. And it's,
right. So Krakoa has to be there, and we need Douglas there to kind of translate and cajole Krakoa to come along.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's another one of those things that was not announced, but it was revealed during, I think it was the very last issue of Hoxpox. It might have been Pox number 6, where they showed us the Quiet Council for the first time after tea time with Moira. I think they went down to the...
It is House of X number 6 is where we see that first page, yes. That first listing of everybody.
Okay, yeah, because Powers of X had that party. The party where everybody kind of...
Right, I think that they both ended at the party, different views of the party. Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. But it was... Another indictment that this is going to be a different time. It's, I don't know how many of us were really looking forward to hot boardroom action, but we don't get much. We don't get much of the dry.
We have a whole series of that coming up, but we're not talking about that today. Forget I said anything. Go ahead, Chris. Keep going. We'll edit that out.
Yeah, we'll get rid of that. But
I wish we could.
I know. The assortment of these characters is one, it's like we said earlier, it's one that shouldn't work, but it does, and it's kind of annoying that it works quite as well as it does. Mr. Sinister especially. This ain't my Sinister. This ain't the Sinister I grew up with. But, damn it works. Sassy Sinister is a great take on the character.
Breakout character. Absolutely.
I mean, I've talked about Hellions until I turned blue over on X-Labs. If anybody out there hasn't read Hellions, read Hellions.
It's completely a side story, but also kind of the best part of this new wave of X-Men books.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And I mean, we talked about what it means to have a soul. What does it mean to be reborn?
But yeah, just imagine Mr. Sinister gets his own team of X-Men to kind of do whatever he wants.
Exactly.
What could go wrong?
Among them is the Orphan Maker, Peter. What's his face? This child in a man's body in a suit of armor who is running around with a walking, talking egg, literally, not gold balls, but nanny. And they're trying to convince him of the merits of the resurrection protocols, but he has the mind of a child. And you get
right. He also asks the inconvenient questions, like, "Is that for real? Really?"
He's like, because and they're screwing with him because they're all jerks. They're half the team is jerks, and it's like, well, why? Because Empath is on the team, and he dies, and he comes back. He's like, well, how do I talk to him? Is it the same guy? Just because he looks like him, is he's the same guy?
Don't ask inconvenient questions.
It's so great that it's the child who asks that question, because we're all asking that question, and here it is. Children are honest, and bringing up the fact that maybe this isn't right. They don't have that cynicism in them just yet. They don't know to gloss over things that are inconvenient. And so we have Hellions is fantastic. Is what I'm trying to say here.
Right. So we could do 5 hours on Hellions, and we may eventually. But right now we're back at the Quiet Council, and so we have this government, and that's all we have is just some folks. It's barely a government yet. So the first thing that's presented to them is we have this little bit of a crisis. Very early on, we had sent out this strike force to get some information about what the humans were up to, and that strike force was successful. They ran into the Fantastic Four a little bit. It was a little weird. And we found out that's what we learned about this immunity, that if a mutant does something wrong, the mutants are going to punish them. And one of the mutants did something wrong. Sabretooth was out there as part of this crew, and they were told, don't get too rough, but this is Sabretooth. So, of course, he gets rough and kills several people.
Yeah.
And the mutants have to decide, how are we going to deal with this? If we're going to be legitimate in front of both ourselves and the rest of the world, we have to deal with this. And what they decide is that we can't kill him because we've decided that doesn't matter. We're not going to have any jails on Krakoa.
Can't imprison him,
exactly. And because he's there, he's talking about murdering everyone over and over again. He's continuing to be full out Sabretooth, right? Yeah. And so what they hit on is this horrific idea where they're just going to kind of put him away for a while. Maybe he'll get a chance someday to redeem himself, or maybe not. Maybe he will be sealed away for eternity inside of the island of Krakoa. He's a mutant. They can't get rid of him. They can't disown him, but they can just open up some just pit into the depths of Krakoa and stick him away, maybe forever, or at least until we get to his miniseries 3 years down the road.
Sure. And it's basically a mutant take on the Phantom Zone from Superman.
Yeah, exactly. But it's showing that they don't really, these mutants don't know what they're doing. They haven't thought ahead. They think they've thought of everything, but they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah.
And after they do this, they say, hey, you know what? A crazy idea, guys. We should have some laws. We just enforced the law. We made it up. We created the law after the crime, which that shouldn't be a thing. But let's say there's some laws. So they come up with these 3 laws, and everything else. It's basically the Constitution, right? Yeah. Or the 10 Commandments. It's both of those things rolled into one.
Sure.
And what they come up with, this first law is going to be, it's phrased different ways in different places, but basically it's very kill no human. Murder no man, kill no human. Some version of that, where maybe there'll be a war, maybe we'll have X-Force have to do their kind of CIA kind of thing, but overall, we're going to say kill no people because those are the folks we can't bring back. If you want to kill each other, we don't like that so much, but
have at it. Yeah.
Have at it.
If
No
you
much
need to do
right.
it.
Maybe the 5 have to work overtime a little bit, but it's not that big a deal. Just a little murder between mutants. So that's the first law.
And you mentioned it's nebulously named, which is quite inconvenient because I don't think even the writers know.
No, it goes back and forth. You'd think this would be on a big tablet somewhere posted where you could point to and say that is what the law says. But no.
There's a scene in space where Magic asks an alien, "Are you human?" And they said no. And it's like, "Good, I can kill you." It's like, but wait, it's kill no man. It's very bizarre, very inconsistent, very convenient. But I guess it's a law worth upholding.
Mm-hmm. The next important law is all about Krakoa, right? We said Krakoa has to have a seat at the table. It is the table. So whatever they do, they can't be offending Krakoa because that is the bedrock on which everything is quite literally built.
Yeah.
So that rule is phrased as respect this sacred land. Mm-hmm. And again, exactly what that means in practice is very nebulous. Right. Yeah. Basically, anything pisses off Krakoa, don't do that.
You did something wrong. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, ask forgiveness right away.
Right.
And the final one is
final law comes out of Nightcrawler again, and he kind of looks back at his own tradition of go forth and multiply, and he says what we need more of us. We need to make more mutants.
It's the inversion of Scarlet Witch,
right? We can't just rely on the 5 bringing people back. We can't rely on the Crucible making the non-functional mutants into functional mutants. We need to go after things the old-fashioned way and create more mutants. Mm-hmm. Which, again, that's the most directly... You can see how that's going to carry out, right? You're going to see what needs to happen, but exactly what... I'm not drawing any pictures for you people out there. This is a podcast. But you can... There's going to be some fallout from this, and that's another part that comes up down the road. But those are the big 3. Murder no man, respect this sacred land, and make more mutants. 3 laws of Krakoa.
Mm-hmm. And they are still the 3 laws of Krakoa. I thought we were going to get additions to that. But
no, we have had no amendments.
No amendments to the Constitution. That doesn't exist, yeah. But that's basically... That's the ins and outs of the very seminal moments of this new era.
There are all sorts of zigs and zags and side stories and some important stories that we're going to get to too. But if you know that much, you know enough, I think, to say, well, maybe the Eternals are going to look at this and what are the Eternals going to think of a situation like this? Or how is this going to rub up against the Avengers? And are they going to step on each other's toes? You can start to see where this Axe event might be going. So if you know that, you know enough to think about things. And if you want to do some reading, because hey, comic books are for reading, or at least looking at the pretty pictures, I'd say the minimum you could do if you just want to read something in a night and understand what we're talking about, read House of X. Yeah. They were originally published kind of back and forth in a weird issue between House and Powers, but you can read House of X all on its own and get the basics.
Yeah, and you 6 don't get issues. All the stupid future stuff.
Nope. All the complicated, all the big picture Hickman woo-woo. If you're into that stuff, that's in Powers of X.
Great.
You can enjoy that. It's in Powers of X. It's good stuff. It's not necessary to understanding the current status of Krakoa. House of X, it's in Marvel Unlimited. You can find it. I'm sure there's trade paperbacks. As far as the eye can see, you can get your hands on it. It's a great read.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you want to read one more issue to understand something important, that's The Crucible, which is in X-Men volume, what is it?
Volume 5, number 7.
Volume 5, number 7. And that's the issue where we learn about the way the mutants can get their powers back.
Mm-hmm. And you might also know that issue because it's the one where Cyclops and Wolverine flirted. I remember
we don't need to get into that.
I remember the news sites kind of ran with that, which when I read the issue, it's like, nobody talked about the Crucible. we're murdering people. Why aren't we talking about the Crucible? We're talking about Scott and Logan.
Something for everybody in these books, Chris. Something for everybody.
I guess.
But I think that's where we could talk about this all night. And hey, we may hang up on the recording and chat all night long, but as far as the listeners, they don't want to hear all that. I think we can tie a bow on it at this point and say, hey, guys, I hope this is what you wanted because this is what you got. And, well, there's going to be some more of this. We're going to talk about more about the X-Men and the mutants. We're going to talk about what the Eternals have been up to, and it's actually pretty darn good. We're going to talk about what the Avengers have been up to. We've heard all about that on the shows that Jim and I do, but we're going to recap the high points for what we think is going to matter for this event. And then once the actual Axe event starts, Chris and I are going to be covering that right on top of things. So that's where you'll hear about this. Jim and I aren't going to talk about that nonsense. We'll talk about the other nonsense, but Chris and I are going to talk about Avengers, X-Men, Eternals.
Yeah,
so
we've got a Spider-Man tie-in now. We've got a Fantastic Four tie-in now.
It's going to be a lot of tie-ins. Interesting because the X-Men universe has not always interacted all that well with the broader Marvel universe. There's been some moments where I said, "Oh, that's interesting," and there's other moments where clearly these offices weren't talking to each other.
It's true.
Franklin Richards. He's a mutant. He's not a mutant. It's kind of so I'm very curious to see how integrated this is. I know the writer of Eternals, Kieran Gillen, is that how you say that?
Kieran Gillen. Yep.
He's the writer of Eternals, and he's also writing now a new X book. He's writing it Immortal X-Men. Yeah. So at least he should be very well tied in. I don't know if Jason Aaron over in Avengers, how much they communicate, but Heck, we're going to find out. And, just like in grand, weird science fiction, we're going to tell you what we think of it. If we think it's fantastic, we're going to say 2 thumbs up. If we think it stinks, we're going to tell you it stinks. So
do we still have that special 5 out of 10?
We do have the special 5. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We hope we don't have to pull it out of storage, but it's there if we need it.
If we need it. Break glass, yes.
So I keep saying we're going to wrap it up. We're really going to wrap it up now. But if you're a listener out there and you want to hear something specific out of this show, let us know. We live to serve. We need all the ideas we can get. Right into the Weird Science Twitter, Weird Science email address. You know all the places to contact us. Hit us up on Slack. We want ideas. If you think we want to go in a completely different direction, hey, we'll try anything.
Sure, yeah.
That, I think, is going to be it for this first episode of, what do we call this again, Chris?
This is, what is this? Oh, the Weird Dose of X.
That's right.
Which, we figured that one a little while ago.
Yeah, that's fine. So, this was a blast. We hope all you listeners had a blast too, and tune in next time for whatever the heck we decide to do next. Good night, everybody.
See you soon.